My name is Barbara Newman, and this is my colleague, Jan DeYoung, and we are both special educators. And we're both special educators with many stories, and I'm sure that you have stories as well. Some of those are very happy stories. The one I'm going to tell you now happens to be a story that I heard way too many times. We both work in a Christian school in Michigan, and what ended up happening parent-teacher conference time is that we had many parents come in that particular day, all of them with horrific stories to tell about their church. These children who had been included for 7 hours a day were being asked to leave, were not part of Sunday school. This family had basically been kicked out of a church, said, look, we just don't have anything for you here. It's best if you find a different place. And that was a very, very difficult time thinking, now how could they be included for 7 hours in a Christian school, and yet they couldn't manage the 45 minutes of whatever program that was at a church setting. So that really got us thinking, what are some things that we've learned that we could hand off to the churches? And so as we go, I want to talk about that. But what we really want to do is hand off a process. And that's what we're going to spend our time thinking about over today and tomorrow, and really put our brains together so that you can leave here. My hope, my prayer, is that when you leave here, you will be confident that that next person that comes to your church door, you'll be able to say, hey, we might not have all the answers, but we know we can try this. So we want you to leave with confidence, and that's our main goal. But I thought we would begin, since I am a teacher, and a few of you know a few of these answers to this because I met you in Florida not too long ago, but we'll still play this little game. This is true, this is false. And because I don't want anybody to get nervous about taking a little quiz, let's just go ahead and say you could talk to somebody next to you if you don't know the answer. Okay? Is that a fair deal? All right. Question number one. If they were to give a percentage in the United States of the number of persons who have disabilities, that number would be about 12%. True or false? What do you think? What do you think? True or false? Oh, we have a mixed reaction here. Actually, that answer is false. You want to guess if that number is higher or lower? Higher. It's more like 20%. That's a lot. And if they say, if you look at houses down a street or in a community, they would say that about one, true or false, in every 4 houses is impacted by some kind of disability. True or false? Yeah, that is true. 1 in every 4. So you think about your church, the number of homes that are around in that community, every 4th, home. That's quite a few. So here we go. This part is true. When I was beginning teaching, they gave me a piece of paper that said the percentage in autism. Okay. Now I graduated in 1984. All right. So at that time, that number was 1 in 10,000 people had autism. That number now, true or false, is about the same. 1 in 10,000 have autism. Oh, anybody know the number? You're right, that's false. Anybody know what it is? 1 in how many? 110. 1 in 110. 1984, I'm not that old, right? 1984 until now, 1 in 110. That has changed dramatically, hasn't it? And in some communities, I was speaking in Indiana, there was a community there that it was 1 in 68. There was a community in New Jersey that was 1 in 92. They did a children's study, ages 3 through 17, and that was 1 in 91. So it depends, again, what area or what people are looking at. But do you think we're going to include in our churches individuals who are on the autism spectrum? Most definitely. And if we're not, we should be, right? That's for sure. Okay, here's one. The Down Syndrome Association released a statistic that of those women who have that prenatal check to see if their child has Down syndrome or other conditions, that 70% of those end in an abortion. True or false? What do you think? Now, some of you are not voting. Let's go.
We're still thinking.
You're still thinking. You know what? That is false. No, not oh good. The number is 90%. 90%, the Down Syndrome Association says, of those that have that test end in an abortion. It's huge. I wonder sometimes what reaction we as churches have when we find that out from a parent. How do we respond to that? Could we respond differently so that within our church communities that statistic changes? You know, what can we do? Okay, here we go. Another question for you. In Barb Newman's opinion, now that's going to be a tricky one, but here we go. In Barb Newman's opinion, the reason churches most often give for not including a person with a disability is that they do not see a clear scriptural reason for doing so. True or false? I'll say it again. The reason churches most often give, in my opinion, for not including an individual with a disability is that they do not see a clear scriptural reason for doing so. True or false? Now again, that's tricky. That's my opinion. I'm going to say it's false. And I think you might know the answer or you wouldn't have signed up for this. The reason that I most often get from churches, they believe it's in Scripture. They know it's what they're supposed to be doing. If you lay out any Bible verse, as they did so beautifully last night, it's like, oh yeah, that's right. But they just don't know what to do or how. That's right. So that's why we're having this. We will spend some time thinking biblically because I think that's a key to what churches need to do, where they need to begin. But we want to give you a whole bunch of how-tos so that you can go back armed with a process, a thing to try, a new pencil, a new idea, a new behavior system, so that you can leave equipped to say, hey, we know what to do. Because in my opinion, once churches get the how-to, they are excited, right? Okay, last question of our true-false quiz. True or false? I promise to make heaven a noisier place. True or false? Well, now you got to remember that one. I'm not giving you the answer right off. So here we go. I'm going to save that one for a little while at the end of our time this first hour together, and I'll tell you what I think that is. I want to just go now, though, to something that is in your handout. Again, for those who came in your folder, you will find this, which is a handout that will allow you to walk with me through this set of PowerPoints that we're going to begin with. And your G.L.U.E training manual, you might want to have that handy as well. These two items out of your kits would be helpful. The G.L.U.E training manual looks like this. All right. You know, it's been really interesting. When we first started including children in our Christian school, it was 1989, and it wasn't very fashionable then. In fact, most children with disabilities were being educated in other buildings, and I think it would be helpful for our time together today for me to talk through educationally some of the things that have happened, because quite honestly, I have seen those same trends happen in the church. So I think that it would help us arrive at kind of what my brain has in mind for what it means to include people with disabilities in our churches, if we can talk this through. I made some phone calls, however, when I first started and found out, boy, there was no agreement on what that word meant, to include. And so I want to get there through a different path, and I want to begin with my father's, prior to my father's life. He's now 85 years old. But you know, many years ago, there was quite a bleak survival rate for persons with disabilities. If you think about it, our medical advances, the things that we've learned over the years, has equipped us and allowed us to be able to do some different things with individuals, to save those lives, to have that 1-pound baby actually make it to kindergarten and way beyond into a life that's thriving with possibilities. But that didn't always happen. And the truth is, sad to me as well, that you actually can find some communities still today where persons with disabilities might be left in a field after birth because they simply will not raise that child in their community for whatever reason. And while it sounds far-fetched, I was speaking to somebody who had gone to another country and had been part of that community, looked around, and finally said to the person leading this conference, "Where are all the people in your country with intellectual disabilities?" And he said, "They're not here." And the speaker said, "You're right, they're not here." And what an interesting comment, because in that country, those individuals were selected out to not be there. And that still happens, although quite rare. And we certainly don't live in that kind of community here, which is important. But I want to go back to where my dad went to public school in Tainter, Iowa. Tainter is one of those towns in Iowa where if you blink, it's gone when you're driving down the road. They had a one-room public schoolhouse where my dad would go to school. And there he remembers a student named Mike. He doesn't really know much about Mike, but when I discovered what Dad and Mike had done growing up together, I thought, Dad, you had the first inclusion program I've ever heard of in Tainter, Iowa. Because at that time, depending on the community, you kind of did whatever, right? And this particular school was just fine with Mike being part of the community. And so Dad remembers that while other kids were with books and other things, Mike, during academic times, kind of had a folder. He has no idea what was in that notebook for Mike, but he knows that he was doing something different from the other kids. But when they went out for recess, Mike always got to be one of the team captains for the ball games because he was really good. And they loved having Mike on their team. And so Dad grew up with this memory of Mike as part of his community. He also remembers the day that they opened the first poor farm in Iowa. That's what they called it at the time. Another word perhaps for an institution, because at that time Mike was pulled out of school and sent to this poor farm where he indeed lived his days and died at that place. Mike had some kind of a intellectual disability, I believe. And institutions were very common for many years. I still know some parents who have now maybe children in their 30s who were still told upon birth, don't get too attached to your child with Down syndrome because you know they'll just move to this particular institution, which was very common during, a chunk of time here prior to the 1970s. But something was happening in those institutions, and I can tell you one story for sure. They were not always monitored very well, and I worked in a group home to put myself through college, and noticed that Louise was one of the individuals I met. She had no hair anywhere on her body. No arm hair, no eyebrows. She had no hair anywhere. And I finally asked, what's the deal? Why doesn't Louise have any hair? And the manager said, well, she was in such and such institution. I said, really? Well, what difference does that make? She said, well, they use that to try out chemotherapy drugs on people to find out what the side effects would be. Now, Louise didn't have cancer, but they gave her that medication, and they found out that your hair never grows back, so that particular drug was never released on the market. That was the tip of the iceberg, and people outed these institutions and said, wait, and they discovered that there was so much abuse happening there. Now, there were some quality ones, some good ones too, but in the 1970s, they had other laws, and these places were shut down in groves. In fact, this is a time, if you look in your communities, that you'll almost always find in the 1970s some kind of school building that was built for persons with disabilities, a kind of a separate place. If you think about it, a county-run option, because in the 1970s they made it a law that everybody could go to school, right? Everybody deserves a free, appropriate public education, and that was a law, and that opened the doors to schools, and they're like, whoa! So they built these school buildings, and so kids could stay with their parents, and they could then go to school during the day. Well, believe it or not, I can still find some models of that. I was in Texas in the fall and met somebody, and they ran a church completely for persons with disabilities. Like, wow. So they had this separate church, kind of like this separate school had started. And I thought, well, that's an interesting model, not very typical. Then the Christian Learning Center, the organization for which I work, this was a time when CLC Network was started. We became a school within a school. Parents had been sending their children to a Christian day school as part of an institutional setting and said, hey, we still want Christian education for our children. So we opened CLC Network in 1978, I believe it was. And we became a school within a school. We found a Christian school that had some extra rooms, and so we were our own entities. I had my first teaching job, my 8 kids sitting in front of me in my room, but they all were children who had some kind of a disability. But many times we can still find this model used within a church, kind of a church within a church. This is our special needs area or wing. Or if you have a disability, it's room 13 that would help meet your particular needs in our church. So you can kind of see that there's a separateness to it they're part of the church as a whole, just like we were sharing playground space and hallways, but it's kind of a separate model. Then we went to something called mainstreaming, where I, as the teacher, would go find other teachers in the building and say, "Hi, how are you, Pam? So glad you're across the hall. You know, I was thinking that maybe when you do read aloud, would you mind if Jonathan would join you?" Okay?
Very disturbing.
Right, exactly what they would ask. Is he very disturbing? That's no, I promise, and I'll come right and get him if you ever would have a problem. So would that be okay with you?
Maybe we'll try it.
Maybe we'll try it. But you see, I'm the special educator and I still own that child. He's mine, right? So if he does act up, I'm going to get him. And it's her decision whether to allow him or not. Oh, Pam, you did that good. I had many conversations like that one. And, but again, oh, there you go, you know. So again, that mainstreaming model, the special educator owns that particular child. This I've seen working in churches too. You might see kids that visit other Sabbath school classes, or they're part of a particular children's group, but there's a different alternate spot really that they sort of belong to, but they are visitors, right? But I want to get to this word called inclusion, because when we started at Zealand Christian, one of the things that we did was we said, I'm not, as a special educator, I'm not owning any kids, okay? If they're 7 and you're the second grade teacher, they're yours. If they're in high school or those ages, they're yours. I'm going to be here to help this work, right? But I want you to own the individuals. They belong to you. So the ownership is part of the general education environment in a school system, and we had to work heavily to resource the friends. Peers were critical, right? So they had to understand that if this person all of a sudden started to scream because the fire alarm went off, it was because this person had very sensitive ears. So we did a lot of work with friendships. And this is really a model that we love to see happening in churches, where we say, okay, we don't have this whole separate department, but what we do have is we have opportunities for people to worship together. They're part of one body. I believe that's scriptural. And here we are. And so might need some special understanding, some new options, some different programming, but basically we would love to see each person be able to be part of this body of believers. And we'll try to find ways to make that happen. Now, still, there are many churches who have a variety of options, and we have found that sometimes that's needed. So we're going to talk through some of those options that churches provide. But when we talk about inclusion, I guess I always think whether that's sort of in a separate program or curriculum, or whether that's part of a Sabbath school group or a youth group or whatever it may be, or an adult setting, worship setting, whatever that might be, we'd love to see that people are part of the group, that they belong there, and that we want to make it possible through other supports to allow that individual to be successful in that place. So I suppose if push came to shove, if I had to come up with some kind of a definition, what defines inclusive community for persons with disabilities, I would say a place of belonging in the church community supported by some kind of individual program and friendships. You might need to change things just a little bit in order to make this work or make this successful. But that's what I would say would define opportunities, and that it's not, it's an opportunity for people to make connections and friendships, that they can learn from one another. We're going to do a little bit more understanding of that, but I actually have, Jan is going to give you my very best definition. Jan, those bookmarks, if you wouldn't mind handing those out a minute. This is a statement that I think is important, and I want you to take it with you so you can slip this little bookmark in your bag. If I had to come up with 2 words that would define what I love to see in a church setting, it is, hey, everyone welcome. So tuck this away because I think that that is what we're looking for. I did work with one church who was more in this model, and they called me and they said, we've got a big problem, can you help us? And it so happened that they didn't spend any time resourcing the other people in the community. However, they were sharing the same halls, they were sharing the same bathrooms, they were sharing the same worship center, they just were often hanging around in separate group areas or small groups for persons with disabilities. So they figured they really didn't have to do that. But they had a huge issue one day in the bathroom, which was a very inclusive setting, was it not? And if they had taken some time to equip the other people in that setting, they would not have had that issue that happened. But it was a huge misunderstanding of an individual who happened to be there. But nobody had the lenses through which to view that situation. And so we had to go back, and I said, look, you are inclusive. You're including individuals as part of your church community. You need to equip, well, I'll give you this small story. You need to equip, and then you can answer this question. You know, people will come into our school or to a church that we've been working with and say, so tell us who's in the inclusion program. I laugh. That's exactly what I do, because think of that question. They're expecting me to say this person with Down syndrome, this person with autism, this person in a wheelchair, this person with, and I just laugh at that. Think about your question. Who's included in this place? Well, that would be everybody. So who's part of the inclusion experience? That would be everybody. And you kind of have to think for everybody as you're getting ready to equip a church. So we're going to talk about that in our time together. We're going to talk about, oh, well, how do you do this? How do you think about setting up a church so that it can be successful, that a person can have those individual programs, good ideas, so that that person can also come one step closer to Jesus Christ. That's really important, isn't it? And how do you get friendships? How do you get people excited about being together in one community? So that's sort of the roadmap that I want to use. A couple of examples from churches that we have worked with. One is Calvary Church in the Grand Rapids, Michigan area. They have all of those models represented at the same time. They have a worship service on a Saturday night exclusively for persons with disabilities. Then they have, this happens to be a Sunday run worship time. On Sunday, they have kind of this separate community for those that need that. They have options for kids to be included throughout the church and for adults to be included throughout the church. And so they have kind of a smorgasbord of options. They also happen to have 7,000 people that attend that church. So perhaps they sort of need many options. We've given them a lot of push, and indeed they have some wonderful people that work there that really maximize the everybody. They're doing a lot of options for people to worship together and be together. But there's some reality to some of the individuals who come there. They're known as a place where anybody can come. And so they do, and they have some really high needs individuals that are part of that community, and they have to figure that out. This other church is much smaller, Grace United Methodist Church in Naperville, Illinois, another one that we've worked with. If they discover that an individual, a child, and they only have programming, they decided we can only think for children in our church. We can't think beyond that. And I really affirmed that, actually. They'll grow into that place, but they couldn't tackle in their minds everything at once. So they really felt God directing them to think about the children's area. And so that's something that they looked at again, was to give a note. It's beautifully written. And it says in there, you know, we are so excited to include your child as part of our children's ministry. We want to get to know your child, and then we will set up options so that that person can be involved in our church's programs. So again, wonderful place, and we will recommend that highly, is to begin by getting to know that person and then figure out ways for that person to plug into what's existing within the church. So does that make sense? And you probably have some models and options from your own church community. I would love for you to find a talking partner that's close enough to you, or you know, if there's somebody sitting over here, include them in your group. We're all about inclusion, right? So make sure everybody has a partner to talk with, and we'll do this several times while we're together. But would you just for a moment think about your own church community? What is it like? Do you have any individuals with disabilities in your church? And think carefully about that, because that word disability actually covers persons that might have some hearing loss and, like me, have one of these buggers in their ear to allow them to access some information as part of a worship service. It could include somebody who physically might have a difference. It includes, on that 20%, children who have ADHD. Now, do you have any children in your church who have some kind of a disability? What about those on the autism spectrum, those with an intellectual difference? What about some individuals who have some mental illness issues, bipolar disorder, depression, anxiety? Those are all part of that 20%. Although I have one friend who's pretty insistent that said that number would go way down if we all understood. I said, what do you mean by that? He said, well, I know how to cure Asperger's syndrome. I said, you do? Well, he said, yeah, get this ready. I've got the cure. Write it down. He said, you have that individual go to their bedroom and close the door. It's gone. And I thought, because what did that person just take away? All of the other people. It is a social difference. So he was saying, if we could equip everybody else that's part of the social environment, probably would go away. And so, his idea is get rid of the other people. Asperger's disorder does not exist. And I thought that was an interesting comment. But in many ways, sometimes we create barriers for people that probably shouldn't exist. Would you really have a disability if every part of your church was accessible for that person? Well, I don't know. How much of that is owned by the other people? So talk with your talking friend or two. Think about your own church, and I'm going to push you to do something else. I'm going to push you to give your church a grade. I'm giving you all now an honorary teaching degree. At the end of your discussion, I'd like you to give your church a grade as a teacher in terms of what grade you would give your church in terms of including persons with disabilities. Okay? Go ahead, do that for just a couple of minutes. Now, you don't have to, especially since we have a tape rolling, give your church's grade aloud, okay? We're not going to do that. But I do want to direct you, in your G.L.U.E manual, one of the tools that you have on page 46, and we actually ran it off for you in your packet this morning, is something called a church survey. What an interesting thing for you to do with some of the leaders in your church, to think about how inclusive is our church community. So again, I think that might be a helpful tool that you could use. One of the nice things about this G.L.U.E manual, it has a website in here, and since you are now the proud owner of this, everything in the back of this book is online. So you can run it off and use it as many times as you want to. If you want to add a question to the form or take a question off or delete it, or if we use the word Sunday school instead of Sabbath school, you could change that in here too, right? So make sure that you alter it to fit your situation. That's why it's online. And so that's one of the many tools that's in the back of this book. Might be a fun thing to go through as a community to say, how are we doing? And just let you evaluate that. But I wanted to take this time before we launch into the rest of our hours together to explain what is G.L.U.E, right? You signed up for something. Did you even know what it was? So that's what I would like to talk about for just a little while is G.L.U.E. And I want to do that, however, from that perspective of a teaching degree and a grade. I've been evaluating that as a special education teacher, and as I can complete my story now a little bit, I was so frustrated with what was happening in the churches that I now spend 1 foot in a classroom in Zeeland, Michigan. I still have that. And my other foot is firmly planted in churches. And so I do a lot of traveling, a lot of working with a variety of denominations to help them better include and say everyone welcome, as opposed to, whoa, don't think so. And that has been, I believe, God's call on my life and that portion of what I do. So that's where I'm at. But I still am that teacher. And I think, so why do kids get poor grades sometimes or good grades sometimes? I think sometimes the student just didn't try, right? They just, you can attest to that. Who else is here as a teacher? Any other teachers in the room? Sometimes you think, if you'd actually studied last night, you might have gotten a better grade, right? I think another reason is that the student just didn't get it. They didn't understand the material. Something was not clear to that particular individual. It could have been that the teacher didn't provide the best resources. Maybe the students were giving them lots of feedback, but they didn't alter, they didn't reteach, they didn't try to help that student connect with the information. It could be that a student gets a good grade and sometimes even a poor grade, but that student had worked hard. That's very possible. And sometimes you get kids that they don't study at all, they're just naturals. Did anybody ever have any of those? They just get good grades because they just do. But I was thinking about those same things. Maybe there's similar reasons in churches why churches get certain grades. It could be that churches just aren't trying very well, right? It could be that maybe they don't get it. They don't understand the importance. It could be that there aren't people out there providing some good resources. And that, folks, is where, and you've got some churches that are naturals and they're working hard at this. There is a broad range. But basically, our goal as CLC Network is to be that group that says, here are some resources, whether it be books or trainings or something. We want to give this to you so that you can check that off your list. You will have some good resources, right? That's what we hope to accomplish in our working with churches, so that you check that off the list, right? And then we believe that if churches are committed to doing this, that there are some tools to figure out the how-tos. All right? That is how this fits together. And sometimes I feel very much with churches, like I did with my 2 young boys, when they were first learning how to eat a variety of foods. And when you're introducing that new food group and you've got it on a spoon, and you're just like, just try it, honey, just try it, and they do this thing. Whatever it's going to be, they're not opening their mouth. But it's like, just, and you know that if they just take a bite, if they just try it, it will be good for their body. It will help them grow. You know that if they take a bite, it will probably be pleasing to them as well, right? So just try it. I feel like I'm this person holding the spoon out to churches. Come on, this is going to be good, because I know how much the whole body is going to benefit if you say yes, if you just try this. I know that once you get a taste of this, it is going to be sweet, and you're going to want to do it over and over and over again. So, but it was so much of a relief to me when I figured out that I was really not the one holding the spoon. This was significant news to me, because it is not me forcing this or holding that child outside the children's ministry doors. Oh no. No, that's God that's got that spoon, right? And is saying, let the children come to me and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these. Just try it, right? Or for that adult, right, who wants to have some kind of access to the church and the wealth of worship and opportunities there. And there God stands outside that church door and says, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you in order to bring praise to God. Just try it. Right? So to partner with that kind of plea, that invitation from God to try this, how important it is. So don't you go back to your church communities thinking, oh, I'm just small and insignificant and can't. No, you go with great power. You go there as a spectator, watching what God wants to do in your community as people just try that. So that was an important perspective. G.L.U.E is an acronym, and it stands for Giving, Loving, Understanding, and Encouraging. And I like, though, the word glue, because sometimes I think it takes a special adhesive to allow each person to stick within the body of Christ. And so that, I think, is an important concept. I wanted to tell you 3 stories as we embark on this, and I want to tell you how G.L.U.E fit into the church's answer to these particular situations. I want to first tell you about David. David is currently in 5th grade, and he's going to be starting in his church youth group begins in grade 6. David happens to have autism, and right now the other kids don't know much about David, and they think he always is laughing at inappropriate times, and that he gets way too close to them when they're trying to talk, and he kind of bugs them, And so there are some issues that David has, and they are now doing this way. They're kind of laughing at him. He's on the fringes. The leaders don't know what to do. There's a lot of information David has, but they're not quite sure how to figure out how to have David be part of youth group. Okay? That's story number 1. Story number 2 is Jonathan. Jonathan is 31 years old. Jonathan happens to have something called Down syndrome. He's an amazing young man, quite a ability to be an actor, lots of things. But as is true in many states, once a person with an intellectual disability hits a certain age, many times the social opportunities bottom out. And right now, Jonathan's father passed away. His mother lives with Jonathan in their home. They go to church. They do attend worship, which is wonderful. But then he goes and sits home. And because there's limits to how many hours he can work and get Social Security, he's only able to go to his job packing groceries at a store 10 hours a week without exceeding the limits. That's Jonathan's life. And the church said, this isn't right. And his mother said, this isn't right, because you know what? I'm getting older, and you know what I really want? I really want somebody who knows when it's Jonathan's birthday. Okay? End of that story. Next story. Louise was just diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And right now, her husband is watching the church do this. Are you familiar with that pose? They don't know how to talk to Louise. They don't know how to understand Louise, and they are backing away from both her spouse and Louise. Okay? So those are 3 stories, and I want to talk to you. Do those remind you of any situations that could be happening in your own communities? So I'm going to tell you how these churches use this G.L.U.E process to put together opportunities for those individuals. Okay? G.L.U.E is a process. It's not a curriculum. I'm not handing you something that you can teach to people on Sunday or Saturday or Wednesday or Thursday. Excuse me. G.L.U.E is one of those things that if you follow the process, you will hopefully come up with a good idea to try towards the end of it. So let me go through those steps. There are 6 steps to this. And this is an overview, and what we're going to do for the rest of our time together is I'm going to give you fuel for each one of those steps, all right? Some specifics. So we're going to go through these quickly because then we're going to kind of dissect it and open it up and stuff in some information that would be helpful for you as you go through these ideas. But I want to relate it again to that dear baby taking that bite. I know one of the first things that happens if you're introducing a new food is you have to read the label, right? I see moms in that, they clog up those baby aisles. Have you ever seen that? Because they are reading every ingredient on those bottles. Well, you do. You have to get to know that. And I think that that's true in our churches as well. We need to talk to the people in charge. That is so important to have the leadership on board, that they get this. And we need to highlight the need. Many times, telling stories like I just did now highlights the need of what's happening in our communities and how we can respond. And then another part of that first step is appointing a coordinator. Now, in here, for example, in the back of your G.L.U.E manual, you have a job description, a suggested job description for a coordinator. That's one of the first tools. And again, it's online, so you can change it and make it your own, but it's on page 41. So these are our suggestions of who that person might be as you're looking for somebody to coordinate sort of a disability or special needs ministry. I think the other thing that's really important is how you approach your leaders. I have seen so many angry people walking in and saying, I've got this rule book from the government that says that I will be here. Well, we need to be sensitive to the rules of the land. I'm not putting that down, but you know what? Our churches are going to be much more open, I think, our leaders, if we come in with a different book. Do you know which one I might suggest? Yeah, like the Bible that many of you are carrying around, because that's our rule book for life. That's how we set things up. And I think it's important for us to communicate in that language with our leaders. Appendix A in your G.L.U.E manual is filled with scriptural reasons and theological thoughts about why we include people with disabilities. You can run off Appendix A and give it to the leaders in your church and ask for a discussion. How important that you stand on Scripture and say, look, this is compelling for our church. And as your own denomination, I heard compelling reasons last night as you were speaking and as Phyllis was speaking about why do we do this? What is unique even within your denomination that would say this is why it's important. Now, I think evangelism is very important to your communities, that each one has an opportunity to be reached. That's significant. So there are people out there, folks, who aren't coming. Statistics will also show that there is a big gap of people that attend church who are more typically developing and those that have disabilities and want to go to church but can't. So important to keep in mind. Step 1. Step 2, again with that baby, well, now it's kind of open it up and look at it a little bit, right? You got to examine what's in. You might touch it, look at that baby checking out that food, right? Got to look at it. Well, that's true too. It's important to talk to families who may be involved in this, whether it's a child or an adult. And it's important to introduce G.L.U.E to your congregation, whether that's through something that happens on Saturday as part of a message, whether that's something that happens as part of the children's ministry with the peers. How do you get them excited about that? We have so many tools to give you that will help you with this part of your plan. Step 3, again, with that baby, you have to think about the possibilities. You know what? Maybe we didn't have the right seating. Maybe the baby wouldn't take a bite because we needed to try feeding that food in a walker or a high chair or a swing or on the floor. Maybe we need different, other tools. Maybe we need a certain sippy cup or silverware, or maybe if I bribe them with their favorite cracker at the end, they will eat this food, right? So what do we need to think about? And I think that that's true with this G.L.U.E process as well. We need to think, who are these individuals that we might have? Who are they? What do they love to do? What's easy for this individual? What's hard for this individual? What places will connect well in our church and what might be difficult? So we need to get to know the individuals and who they are. And I also think it's important to use some tools to do that. Part of your G.L.U.E manual, again, is getting to know the individual. And we have both a parent survey as well as an adult survey in there. Once again, one person said to me, oh, there's way too many questions in here. We would never want to. I said, that's great because it's online. So you can just pull it up and delete the questions you don't want or add ones that you do to make it your own. You put your own church name on the top of it. This can be your own personalized form, whatever you want to do with that. But again, how do you get to know that individual? So you seek information from parents or from the individual or a guardian. And then we turn that into something that we call a welcome page. We'll show you how to do that pretty soon. I think as part of this step, though, it's also important to get to know your church. This would be a great time to fill out that church survey to sort of get to know what gifts do we have as a community. Quite honestly, if I knew that Rosemary was part of my church community, I figured we would be covered. Because I know Rosemary, and she'd be really good at putting this together. So she is a particular asset to our church community because of what she knows. You may already be thinking, you may have a particular parent, an occupational therapist, a person who's already working in some kind of field, a teacher. Teachers are great at figuring out processes and how to put some things in place. So think about your church's assets. What do they already have? Maybe you already have a church that's done a great job of including a particular individual, but they really haven't thought much beyond Marvin, And so how do we take what they've already done and broaden that experience so that they're thinking for some other individuals? Does that make sense? So you get to know your church a little bit. and you imagine possibilities, when and how could this individual be included in worship, in education, in fellowship, in service opportunities and outreach. Step 4, however, and one of the reasons as an organization we've limited it to sort of these 4 areas, not that there aren't many more, but sometimes our church communities are asked to do interesting things. We believe that these are 4 things, and I'll see if you agree with me, that most churches provide for its members, right? Opportunities for worship, opportunities for education, opportunities for fellowship, and opportunities to use your gifts. Yes? Yeah. And so many times people will come to a church, well, so-and-so needs housing, can you do that? Well, that might be something a church would want to think about, but that's not typically a role that the church does, is to provide housing for all its members, right? So you have to think that through, and I think we have to make sure we have our core available, and not that we can't think beyond that, but I've seen churches get so swamped in so many issues that they're losing their core focus. I think we do, however, we're called to do for that individual what we do for all of our other members in some way, shape, or form. Then step 4, we're going to talk about how do you select that right glue. Again, the parents looking it over said, okay, I got this. We're going to have the kid's favorite teddy bear. I'm going to have a large selection of spoons, and then we're going to use the favorite sippy cup. Then I'm sure that this child is going to take this bite, all right? They've arranged their tools so that they can move forward. And I think that that's true. We have to develop an action plan. And again, the action plan not only needs to be for the individual, but also for the others. So let me think this through with you for just a moment. Let's think about that worship setting. Let's just imagine that a particular individual doesn't have any words, but yet they could maybe do this, all right? So if an individual is going to begin to, during a particular song, wave this, which might be an excellent form of praise and an acceptable offering to God, right? What might the other people need to know in order to receive that person and what they were doing? Okay? you always have to think for both sides of the page, as I call it. Not only for that individual, but also for the everybody else. Because I've seen so many churches where they've implemented ideas, but then people are like, oh, well, that certainly, I bet you can come up with a word, that certainly is a distraction, it's strange, right? But the individual worship leader was talking one day and they said, you know what? I've asked Carla if she would, during this song, to wave a banner that has a purple flag, in front of our congregation today, because I want us to think of Jesus Christ as King, and that's a royal color. And so I've asked this person to wave that as a reminder to us that Jesus is King. Again, whatever. That was so you know what? Do you think that Carla was a distraction? No. She was an important part of that worship experience. So again, if he had said nothing, Carla could have been a distraction, but by preparing the congregation for what was happening, that changes things. In education, you may decide, hey, you know what? This particular individual could use a buddy. So let's equip a friend to be a buddy, to maybe do some of those tasks that might be hard for this child. But again, we're going to clue in that buddy enough to know there are things that this child can just fine do well for herself, so don't do those. But if that person needs a hand, that would be okay. It might be during fellowship that you decide you need to provide a gluten-free snack for some individuals, because that's a big deal. And we'll kick off allergies and some behavior concerns, so maybe that's part of the fellowship plan for an individual. Could be, too, with service, and this is an interesting thing that we have found so often. Churches are caught in that place where they are really comfortable serving the person with a disability. Let me help you. Let me give to you. Let me be there for you, right? I am the giver, that person is the receiver. And sometimes I think it's really important for our church communities to understand that each one has been given a gift to bring to that community. So that individual with a disability can bring a gift to my life as well. And I'm going to tell many stories about that as we go on, because I think that's critical. But sometimes we have to get other members of our communities to be able to receive from a person with a disability, which can be an interesting thing as well. So your plan is not only for that person with a disability, but the plan is also for the everybody else. What do we need in order for that to function? So again, an action plan is important. We're going to move on now to discover, does this person need a GLUE team? As you look through your book, you will notice that not everybody needs a GLUE team, but it's kind of the big ultimate thing that you can use to support most individuals with most needs, all right? So those that might be the most complex, I wouldn't use it for a child with ADHD. Probably wouldn't use it for me. I don't need that. I just need to be able to hear stuff. So as long as I can hear stuff, I'm good to go and can connect with that particular setting. However, let me talk about those 3 stories that I talked about earlier and kind of how they ended up and how they use this GLUE process. 2 of those 3 we decided to use for a GLUE team. So think about those steps I've just talked about. At the end of step 4, it will ask, does this person need a GLUE team, right? David, heading into youth group. Again, this church had already gone through the process of equipping leaders. They were excited, but they hadn't equipped the specific youth leaders to understand who David was. So they got parents to fill out that parent survey that's in your book, and they put together this welcome page from that information to explain who David was, and with parents' permission gave that to the youth leader so that they could better understand. David is bright, he loves music, and he absolutely is gifted in using the computer. Difficult for him would be things like trying to always know how close to get to somebody when you talk. Social understanding, and because he understands words differently, many times he may laugh at a time when somebody else won't, because he hears something differently than what you do. But David really wants to have friends, and he also loves, similar things to 4 of the other kids that are heading into this grade because of his love for music. You know what? That, plus they did a discussion with the peers about David and autism and what he likes to do. You know what? David didn't need a GLUE team. By equipping those leaders, by getting to know David, equipping the leaders, equipping the peers, done. They now know how to understand David, and they gave them words. If David gets too close, you just tell him to back off, Oh, okay, we can do that. But sometimes peers need permission to know what to do. Many times people do this, in my experience, because they are afraid or they don't know what to do. Have you seen that too? All right. Second situation was Jonathan. Jonathan doesn't have a life. Jonathan and his mom are there, and his mother will pass away. Nobody will know Jonathan. He will stop going to church because he won't have a ride. And that desire of his mother to have somebody know his birthday, gone, right? Well, they decided to put a G.L.U.E team together. They did all of the other pieces of the process. They interviewed Jonathan and his mom on that adult forum, kind of found out more about Jonathan. They discovered what he loved to do. They discovered the things that were more difficult for him. They put that down together, and then they went in front of the community, again, equipping the congregation to say, we are looking for 4 families that would enjoy spending time with Jonathan once a month. Very important that families knew exactly what their commitment would be. Did you hear that? What am I asking for? Once a month. Hanging out with Jonathan. Okay? Well, they did indeed get those 4 volunteers, and they spent time training them. That is really important as part of the G.L.U.E process. They don't just throw people in beside Jonathan. They train them to know, how does Jonathan communicate? What does he like to do? Well, they soon discovered that between movies, restaurants, and hanging out at basketball games, they had Jonathan covered. So they got a calendar out. They each took a week. It's so cool because Jonathan doesn't sit with his mom anymore at church. Who does he sit with? He finds one of his buddies, and they hang out once a month. He's expanded his life to include more people. Jonathan now has a life, something to do. How hard was that for that church? Well, could you get people to make that once a month commitment? They did. And because they knew exactly what they were volunteering for, so cool. Talked to Mom not too long ago. Guess what she's happy about?
She didn't have to worry about him.
That's right. There are lots of people who will know when it's his birthday, right? In fact, the other time it was his birthday, they got their group together, their G.L.U.E team together, and had a celebration. Isn't that great? So again, neat stories that can happen. Again, similar thing with Louise. They decided to put together a G.L.U.E team. They structured it a little bit differently. They actually targeted couples that had hung out with Hank and Louise for a long time. And so these were people that already knew them and said, would you consider being part of a special team? Well, yeah, because they took that information about who Louise was and they gave them a script, a welcome page of sorts. And they said, look, when you're with Louise, these are the things that she'll probably do. Say, you could sing these songs because she loves them. You could read these scripture verses because they're meaningful. And here's a photo album of pictures she will enjoy looking at with you. The names of the people are on the backs of the pictures in case you don't remember. So they decided to, because of their age and what they could commit, they each took 2 times. 2 of the women of the couples went to visit with Louise. The 2 guys, they took Hank out for that much needed cup of coffee because Hank had been doing a lot of work. So once a week, Louise and Hank had a couple of visitors. And it was a wonderful gift. And as she changed and walked through different stages of Alzheimer's, they knew what to do. They knew what to expect. And they could be part of both of their lives until the time when she walked into that place with Jesus. And isn't that a beautiful picture of what our communities can do? So that G.L.U.E team concept, again, people do this because they have no clue how to visit with Louise. What do you talk about? But if somebody gives you a script, right, that was very helpful. And they soon became comfortable knowing what that was like. Okay, step 5 involves spreading that G.L.U.E. Again, we're ready now to feed this baby this bite. And are you ready for this? Hard-earned. We've got our cups in place. We've got this supportive community. Maybe they're the cheering team, we got the teddy bear, and ta-da! That baby takes a bite because we had set that child up for success. And I think that, again, that's where we're at in the G.L.U.E process in step 5. We need to inform people. We need to get the action plan. We need to let them know who Jonathan is and who Louise is. We need to set up maybe some meals because these parents are in therapy, 3 times a week. We need to train people till they're comfortable. Maybe our G.L.U.E process will involve somebody who's going to adapt some of the materials so that this person can connect with what the other children are learning and studying. Maybe it will involve rides. Who knows what the needs are and what you're going to put together. But now's time to set it up in the action plan. And then finally, you need to, again, that coordinator is right there to oversee it all. And then finally, the celebration, right? Big news, baby takes a bite. We are all excited about this, but I think, again, step 6 of that G.L.U.E step can't be diminished by celebrating, maybe commissioning that group of people to step up and pray a blessing over them for the role that they're going to fill. We found that gratitude gatherings and getting together to look at the plan and can be very helpful. We're going to tell you stories of G.L.U.E teams. We have one that's been going on, I believe. Jan, am I right? 19 years for Nathan's? 19 years. Believe it or not, I think there are only 3 families due to moving that have dropped out of that G.L.U.E team. Wow is right. But once they formed relationships, once they took that bite, right, they knew that this was going to be a good thing. So we're going to tell you more stories about that. I promised you when we started that I was going to give you the answer to that question. I'm going to make heaven a noisier place. Do you remember that one? So here we go. This is my thought. And by the way, I'm modeling something many times over, and I hope you catch that I often use with children or adults in preparing a community. And this is often an activity that I will do. You have my full blessing and permission to snitch this activity and any others that I mention if they are beneficial to your community. So here we go. I will often say to the children, how do we praise God? And they will say singing, praying, whatever. They come up with this list. But they usually don't think of this one. And I will tell them, did you know that you can praise God by the way you treat each other? If there's a person who's standing off to the side or they're new here in our Sabbath school and you welcome them over and you say, here, come sit with me, there's a shout of praise in heaven, right? If there's a person who maybe other people haven't been very nice to and you say, come here, I want you to be part of my group, there's a shout of praise in heaven. Do you know that by the end of today, by the way you treat each other, we could make heaven a noisier place? What do you think about that?
Amen.
And I think, again, going to Romans 15, verse 7, accept one another then, just as Christ accepted you, in order to bring praise to God. And to set that out in front of the community to say, look, the way we treat one another is one of the ways that we can bring praise to God. And, I often use that decibel level, and it's a great thing to go back to because as you watch kids doing that with each other, you can affirm them and say, wait, Pam, I know, I heard that shout of praise in heaven. You were doing, so you've got something to go back to as you watch the way people are interacting. One of the things I guess I will challenge you with as we close this first session is the same thing. Are you ready to make heaven a noisier place? Because I know for sure 1 in 4 houses. I know for sure that there's not as many people with disabilities in our churches as should be or could be. I know that they're staying home, and I know that as your church does this pose, I think this is the Jesus pose. I don't know about you. This reminds me of those disciples that said, hey, Jesus is too busy, just go away, right? But this one, as we assume this pose, as we take that bookmark and say, everybody welcome, as we welcome those individuals that may not have been welcomed, or those individuals that have been turned away from 4 other churches and finally just stopped trying because they were so exhausted, or those churches that said, yeah, you can come and you're welcome to watch your child in room 7 during the service. Oh, well, why would I go there anyway? Because I can do that at home and it's much easier, right? When we do this way, I was talking to Delia. I'm gonna mention her name because you, my dear woman, were sharing a story last night. A tough kiddo who you chose to watch during your church's service. Well, I'm saying this because I mean this. I heard that story and I thought, there was a shout of praise in heaven. And there were people that said, you need to go get that child's mother the way that child's behaving. And she said, no, I'm sticking this out because that mom, she needs to be in worship. Shout of praise in heaven. Everyone welcome. What a beautiful gift that is to our communities to say, we want each one here. So, anybody game? Want to make heaven a noisier place? All right.